This is ClueCon Weekly, the official FreeSwitch web show produced and broadcasted directly from FreeSwitch. ClueCon Weekly features live updates from the FreeSwitch developers and presentations from various pioneers of communications technology. ClueCon Weekly is brought to you by FreeSwitch Solutions, the official consulting firm of the FreeSwitch open source project. Get help from the experts. Visit freeswitch.com. ClueCon, the premier technology conference for telecom, WebRTC, IoT, and all things maker. ClueCon is held every year in Chicago, Illinois, and offers an all-day hackathon and 4 days of technology-rich presentations from developers around the world. Learn more at ClueCon.com or call 877-748-CLUE.
All right, welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Today is the 15th of November, 2017, and today we've got a lot of fun stuff going on. Matt Jordan from Digium, CTO over there, will be joining us, and he'll be talking about Asterisk and some various other things, so you guys hang out for that. Matt, let's go over to Kathleen for the news.
Thanks, Ken. Join us at IT Expo in February in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're proud to be able to offer a full day of free training on Tuesday, February the 13th, and registration will open in a few weeks under the Workshops and Training tab on the IT Expo website. And ClueCon will be earlier this year. It's taking place from July 23rd to July 26th. You can visit cluecon.com/register.html to get your tickets. And have you seen our new tips and tricks playlist on our YouTube channel? If you have not, go check that out. We've got a lot of great instructional videos, and we'll be periodically adding more as we go along. Make sure you subscribe to that. And our new segment, we'll be taking questions. You'll get to see that in just a little bit. But if you have any questions for the team or any confusion or things you would like answered, please submit your questions to Facebook, Twitter, HipChat, IRC, or our mailing list, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. And be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and sign up for our mailing list to get all the greatest, latest FreeSwitch news. And thank you for watching. Back to you, Ken.
All right, thank you very much, Kathleen. So this week, guys, we're going to do something brand new here. It's called Community Corner. And we're going to go over to Mr. Jersey Mike and get him started on that. Jersey, how you doing today?
Good, wonderful. Thank you, Ken. Today we had a question. It's a very interesting one, actually. What is the best way to record video on a FreeSwitch server? And so we're going to ask Michael Jarris that question. Michael?
All righty. So it's a little bit of a layered question. The first part of the question is, what do you mean record video? Do you mean someone's calling in just recording just their video stream, or do you mean I called you and said, hey, Mike, what's going on? And you want to record both of our conversations. So are you talking about the second scenario where you want to record our video call both directions?
Well, yeah, I think both directions is important. But for the audience, why don't we figure out what all the possibilities are? And additionally, we could just do simple audio without the video too. So yeah. I believe that would be done in a little bit of a different manner, right?
Well, I mean, it's not really a different way. So there's two main ways to record. One would be when you're just you have like a one-legged call. I'm just calling in and I want to record. And that would use the record application. And that's just application name record. And then the data for the application is the name of the file you want to record to. And then the other way to do it would be when it's doing a bridge call, and you would use an application called record_session. And that takes the same sort of data where you would pass both. And from there, so that works for both audio and video calls. In order to record to video, you need to record to a file format type that supports video. So the way that we typically use and what I recommend, excuse me, is to use mod AV. That's what we use to record to MP4 files, and also what we use for the YouTube streaming for this conference. So if you just, let's say you want to record to an MP4 file, you do record session, and then path to a file name .mp4. This requires that you have ModAV built, and then, for example, on Debian, you need to have the non-free repos, and you need to install the libav codec extras package as well to get full support for this. And then all you do is you run the record session application, you bridge your call, and it'll record. By default, I believe it's a side-by-side video of both of our video streams. Pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, as easy as recording audio, just you record to a file format that supports video as well.
And I believe there's some options there too. So like you can record on answer as well, right?
Yeah. So if you'd like to, you can run your record session application in an execute on answer, and the way you would do that would be, or in an execute on media as well. You would put those in the curly braces in your dial string, the execute on answer or execute on media, and I'm sure when we put this video out, we can put some links to Confluence, our wiki, for how to do this. So yeah, you could do that, and you could also start the recording in the middle of a call if you're controlling via something like ESL by I guess you can UUID record that call on the fly, or you could do a broadcast of the record session as well. And you could start that in the middle of a call as well. In a conference, you can just use the conference record application, and that'll record, like here, the whole canvas into the recording.
Wow, that's great. So professional opinion directly from the authors, direct access. Amazing.
Awesome.
I guess, Ken, it's back to you. Thank you, Michael.
No problem.
Oh, it helps if I'm not muted. Actually, back to you, Jersey Mike. Go ahead, and because I think we've got a special guest you want to talk to today.
Oh, today, all right. Today we have Matt Jordan from Digium. So, Matt,
how's it going, Michael?
On to today's call.
How's it going, Michael?
Wonderful, actually.
I think that means we're unmuted and we're going. Yeah. Have that sort of slightly awkward, oh, we're talking now.
So Matt, thank you for joining us today. And it's always good to have another project on that is wonderful and has broken ground in the open source community. So thank you for coming in.
Glad to be here, and it's not like there's no history between Asterisk and FreeSwitch, right? It's just all good. So,
the wonderful part is there's such a wonderful relationship.
Exactly. And, I kind of want to just, for everybody who's watching this going, Digium? Why is the Asterisk Digium person on this? One, we've been here before. We're going to be back again. And, for everybody who's watching, we had a large contingent of the FreeSwitch team at AstroCon this year. And folks from Digium and the Asterisk Project make it up to ClueCon each year. We've got mutual community members, frankly, people who use both Asterisk and FreeSwitch. So this notion, I was sort of joking about it, I think it was probably on Twitter, because like everything happens on Twitter, that, there is a friendly co-opetition between projects, and I think that's actually a great thing, that there are places where people who use these projects, these things do cooperate and they work together, and there are times where there's overlap, but I view friendly competition as being an awesome thing. It's a way to make both projects better. So it's awesome to be here talking with you and Mike and everybody else on the FreeSwitch team.
Well, and I've got to tell you, I did the moderator duties for 2 days, and I had so much fun doing that. Like for me, there's nothing there's nothing more entertaining than having, working within the live recordings and that type of stuff, and essentially, what I'm doing here, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. But Matt, you wanted to talk about infrastructure as a service today, correct?
Yeah. Well, hey, floor's open, so we can talk about infrastructure as a service and cloud platforms. We can talk about Asterisk. We can talk about open source. Whatever you guys want to talk about. I think everybody who knows me knows that I can probably talk ad nauseum about all sorts of things. So probably happens when they give you the C title. I think that's part of a prerequisite. Do you want to start with infrastructure? Maybe see what's interesting there?
Sure, absolutely.
So, I don't know, just sort of a foundational kind of thing. I know people deploy FreeSwitch and Asterisk, I would say probably in a very similar fashion when you're kind of looking at a hosted infrastructure. They're probably fulfilling a fairly similar role there. FreeSwitch probably has a couple different applications that Asterisk does, and I know FreeSwitch plays very predominantly in an SBC space, and that's probably not something where you would typically find Asterisk. You could do it, but it's not our traditional fit. But from a media application server, gateway, clearly Asterisk has been used as a gateway a whole lot. Certainly FreeSwitch can be used as that as well. I think there's a lot of interesting implications for trying to do that in a sort of more modern kind of environment. One of the things we've seen in our community, and I'm sure, given that Dan Jenkins participates in both communities, you probably see this in your community as well, is people trying to take what I would call maybe modern web ways of deploying infrastructure and trying to apply them to really what are sort of our traditional, I don't even use the term in a pejorative sense, but monolith applications, right? The FreeSwitch, Asterisk, these are relatively large applications that have lots of functionality bundled into them. They like to own a lot of resources. They tend to hey, how do you increase performance of Asterisk? Give it more cores. That's like the first thing we suggest, right? Not why don't you horizontally shard that? It's more of, no, just feed the beast. Keep giving it more resources up into, if you don't care about survivability and things like that. There's been a lot of interesting work being done in that space. So I guess my question, maybe back to the FreeSwitch team, do you guys see a similar thing where you've got people doing containerization and orchestration frameworks and maybe even just something as simple as OpenStack being applied to FreeSwitch?
Well, me personally, I use extensive use of LXC.
Right.
Great containerization technology, and then on top of it, I have the tendency to shy away from Docker. Not fully. I'm not fully convinced on the whole Docker model. It hasn't sunk through in my head, but without any question, I do like LXC, especially when put together with some of the other like libvirt and stuff like that. So I'm kind of like one of those guys that sits on the bottom level and then builds little blocks on top, which is actually, I guess, the big advertisement behind Docker, right?
Yeah. No.
But in the end, Docker is just a whole lot of scripts that control everything. But it's that is also it's a cool technology too. It is. It's just it's an all-in-one solution, I suppose.
I can't remember the speaker, although I made sure I followed him on Twitter afterwards, but it was actually at ClueCon. Y'all had one of the best talks I've seen at a conference, and not to downplay Kamalia World or Astrocon. I think we've got awesome talks too, but I'll put this in the top 5 talks I've seen across all conferences in the past, say, 2 to 3 years at ClueCon. I wish I can remember the guy's name now, but he had just the greatest presentation about why Docker sucks. It was brutal. and it was very technical and very accurate, but it was just a harsh dose of reality. And as somebody who I am using Docker, and we do actually deploy a lot of systems using Docker.
I think that was Cal.
It was Cal. Yes, that's exactly it. It was fantastic. I would encourage anybody to go watch it. You may not want to have your children in the room when you're watching it, but at the same time, it was just an absolutely fabulous presentation. We've gone all in on Docker in places, but that has not been without a whole lot of sharp edges, right? So, and sometimes it's Docker. Sometimes, I mean, certainly Docker's file system woes are practically legendary at this point. Docker networking continues to be, frankly, subpar. Particularly, I mean, is it subpar if I'm running a web service and I've got one port I need to open? Probably not. Is it subpar when you're running Asterisk or FreeSwitch and I need to open up 30 or 40,000 UDP ports? Probably yes. So, there's a lot of things you have to work through with Docker networking and Docker's abysmal manipulation of the file system. Although to their credit, they've gotten a lot better on that. They actually have made some pretty major improvements on that. But we've also found just a lot of sharp edges in terms of trying to... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but Docker uses NAT. It uses extensive use of NAT, which has always been a challenge, right?
Yeah. So you're pretty much, whenever you sort of think, boy, asterisk behind a NAT, that's hard. You're like, nope, that's just now where you're starting from. Think about the most horribly complex asterisk environment to go deploy in, and that's sort of your baseline assumption. And now you have to go deal with all sorts of other things. And we actually have some things that in some of our, I would say, probably more of our R&D efforts here at Digium, where we actually have some pretty complicated environments where we have these things working, and there have been plenty of people who have come to AstraCon who have given presentations on doing this kind of thing as well. Sean McCord has done some interesting things with Kubernetes and Asterisk running in Docker, where he will actually grow and shrink an Asterisk cluster using Kubernetes. So these things are possible, but they are challenging. Like, this is not you just sort of roll with this thing and you have this thing. You have to really understand the technology, and you really have to understand, at least with Asterisk, you have to really understand Asterisk. You have to understand what do these NAT settings actually mean, and what is the right thing to go enable and disable when I'm sitting in a container. Whether or not using net equals host in Docker or not, you really do need to understand this stuff. So the other challenge that we've seen with Docker, and I'm not sure how it is with LXC, and I'm not sure how everybody else is doing it, I think sometimes this just depends upon the particular combination of technologies that you pick. But man, you are jumping on the hamster treadmill of version dependencies and version pinning and upgrade nightmares and everything else, because Docker's not stable. It's arguably getting more stable, but things break between versions all the time. You've got usually you have some sort of orchestration framework. Even if you're using something, even if you haven't gone into Kubernetes, you might be using Puppet, Chef, or Ansible to go control your infrastructure. Those have Docker modules that then have to get version pinned back to the specific version of Docker. And so you're constantly wrestling with this sort of infrastructure maintenance nightmare. And as one of my own guys actually told me, and I thought it was one of the best sort of one-offs on this whole problem, he's like, nobody in a business goes, you know what I want to be interesting? I want my infrastructure to be interesting. That sounds like fun, right? Forget products and customers. Let's have the most cutting-edge thing that my customer doesn't care about. Yeah, I don't know. So I think there's a lot of...
So it's like a turf war between the IT department and management, right? Executive management, and the guys down in the IT department doing job justification. Well, if we make it this more complicated, we can add another 10 guys.
Yeah, well, and the best part was this was one of my IT guys. Like, that's how bad he'd gotten. He's like, he's a great guy. He's one of, and I wouldn't even call him an IT. He's very much a DevOps kind of guy. And he's just like, yeah, we could be doing this a lot simpler, And I was like, well, but, immutable infrastructure and, there's good, he's like, yeah, but, or we could just be done. So, I think that, one of my, I'd throw this out there, and this may be people may be watching this going, this is a CTO saying this. Aren't you supposed to be, all, visionary and thinking of the future and blockchain and blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, if you're going to go adopt all these technologies, you have to be solving a problem. There has to be a reason for doing this, right? And if you're not operating, or you're not at least shooting to operate at a fairly large scale, you can spend a lot of time on all this stuff and have nothing to show for it. Because it is absolutely a fast-moving target. Kubernetes, Docker, all of this containerization technology is moving at light speed, and they're breaking things. And if you're trying to roll out a system and you expect that to be a stable thing, you either are not going to have stability, or you're going to take a large burden on yourself to ensure stability for your customer. And that is definitely sort of the problem du jour as we see it for infrastructure as a service today. To their credit, I would say OpenStack used to be in this camp. And certainly when we upgrade OpenStack instances, there's still issues, but I think that they have probably just because of maturity, their versions are a little bit less painful to jump between. But at the same time, I would say pretty much across the board, any of these large infrastructure projects are still in the we don't have an LTS strategy kind of camp. That's a constant challenge, I think, for organizations doing this kind of thing.
Well, not only that, but security is also within that realm. Security is a big issue because when you have the CF groups and all that stuff. I mean, earlier implementations, there was a lot of bleeding between the different containers, and that's always I think that although it's been pretty much really locked up. Or locked down, I think there's still a lot of fears out there, especially coming from the container community.
You've got that, and just because you're running in a container doesn't mean best practices don't apply, right? So you can do things where I'm in a container, so I'll just run as root. Still maybe not be a good idea, right? Like there's particularly if you're doing things where you may be, common practice with Asterisk is to map some volumes across, right? And if you're running as root, well, then if you're root in the container and you've mapped a volume across, well, now you have access to that volume. And what does that do, right? I mean, there's even if the container technology is working, the specific deployment may still open up security risks if you aren't using good security best practices. And so that, these things, containers don't solve the fundamentals of you need to be using IT best practices, and hardening your deployment never goes away. And certainly you also run into,
So take it away. Don't mount to proc.
Yeah, little things, right? Yeah. And the funny thing is we think about, the benefit of some of this technology in terms of providing elasticity to your infrastructure, or in terms of, maybe guaranteeing immutability so that, I know exactly what I'm running, and I'd actually take away the ability for a sysadmin to jump in and change things in my production environment. And while that's a good thing, you have to remember, well, okay, so if I look at the latter one, well, now I can't change things, right? So in order to go actually roll something out to the production environment, even if I've got a big thing going on, I either have to backdoor my Docker container somehow, which is doable, but also a really bad idea and breaks the whole thing you're trying to achieve there in the first place. Or I have to have a whole process built around how do I get changes rolled out, right? So it's not just adopt containers and be done. You're more likely to change your entire organization and then adopt containers, right? There's just how are you actually approaching the whole notion of the operation of your environment that people just gloss right over, and they try to take their traditional IT organization and they anoint their sysadmins as DevOps and expect that that's going to fix everything, and that's just not a good idea. On the latter one, if you go to elasticity, holy cow, man, you want to talk about making your monitoring challenging, right? And how do you actually know what's actually spun up or down? An Asterisk too, and I'm guessing this is the case for FreeSwitch, but I would imagine that you guys run into the same sorts of things. Say I've got a pool of Asterisk instances, and I'm like, okay, I look at I'm actually monitoring all this stuff, maybe using Prometheus or Sensu or one of those newfangled things that the kids have rolled out these days. And I'm like, wow, this one's not, I've got 5 instances of asterisk and one of them is, not doing anything. I'd like to spin that down. Let's save some power, right? Reduce my costs. And I look at them like, oh, well, nobody's using it except for one call. And that one call is a conference call. And it's been up for 4 hours. What do? Like, can I kill it? Because maybe somebody just forgot to hang up someplace. There's media flowing, and so the RTP keep alives are keeping it up, and there's a session timer, and somebody just forgot to hang up the conference phone in their meeting room. That's one of my customers. Totally possible. Maybe it's a quarterly all hands. I don't know, right? I would like to say, do you try to automate this?
Depends on the billing model.
Exactly, right? How angry do I want my customer to be with me? These are considerations though that I think when you've got people like me, like you've got your C-level executives who are watching too much of the things coming out of Google, and they're like, "Ooh, this sounds great. We can save some money here." Our world, the real-time communication world, is not the same as the people who I think are developing these technologies. We have state. We have things that have to be persistent. If your website is down for a little bit or your website can't be reached for one part of the world, people hit refresh. If suddenly people can't call their business, they get really angry with you. Like, this is, I'm going to go move providers because, no calls were reaching my business today. There's just a different level of expectation with this stuff. And so there's things that I think some people try to do with this stuff that makes very good sense in the web world. I'm not saying we shouldn't be trying to do that in the telecom world, but I think that we have a different set of constraints we're operating under. And it makes some of these things a lot more challenging to adopt. But it also makes it interesting.
It's an interesting point because I think there is a little bit, like when you come from the web developer side and you come from the telecom side, that sometimes the two shall never meet. It's the guys who could build the unbelievable scalable infrastructure. Well, they're not so good at building portals.
No.
They understand. And they're not so great at building real-time communications, but they understand how to make these highly scalable systems that operate really well. And so sometimes there's a challenge within the collaboration of such things. And when you do get them together, you can build a product that is impressive and does something new and interesting. That's what I always love to see. I love to see those new up and coming and emerging technologies because, to me, it's always interesting to see something new. And when you mentioned, earlier in the call, you mentioned Dan. Like I remember Dan years ago was like one of the first guys to knock out Node.js and stuff, and that was, and use it as a connector. I mean, that was some pretty cool stuff back then.
Yep. No, and I think Dan, to his credit, has been trying to think about this problem for quite a long time, and he brings a pretty unique perspective to this whole problem. You're talking about sometimes these worlds don't quite marry up. We actually, are you familiar with CAdvisor at all? It's a Google project that does monitoring, host level monitoring. It gets used with containers a lot, so I don't know if you'd run into it with your LXC stuff. Okay, so there used to be a whole bunch of projects that would do container level monitoring for Prometheus, and they were real simple, but there was a plethora of them, right? So there's like Prometheus Node Exporter, Prometheus Container Exporter, and this is if you're using Prometheus as your sort of monitoring solution. And all of them got deprecated. And back to my whole comment about churn and things just, you're like, hey, we've got our infrastructure done. No, it's not, because, these projects just disappeared. So the replacement was something called CAdvisor. And I'm not trying to knock CAdvisor terribly hard, but I think this is just where there's a good example of a disconnect. So CAdvisor is a monitoring project, and rather than being specific to Prometheus, which has a very unique model of monitoring, it's got a pull model as opposed to a push model, they decided for whatever reason that CAdvisor needed to be able to monitor everything for all possible monitoring backends. And so needless to say, the complexity of this project has just exploded, and it's much larger than you would expect when it's just a little client-side daemon that gathers some statistics. So we were in our staging environment, we're testing things out, and so we, rolled CAdvisor out there. And, previously one of the container exporters that was running on some of our real-time instances would maybe take up between no more than 1% of the CPU, right? I mean, barely a blip at all. CAdvisor was about 75%. So my monitoring tool on my real-time system is hogging up 75% of the CPU resources. Not 75% of one CPU, but 75% of all the CPUs on that box. And you're just, it's like, oh, come on, guys, like that's not gonna cut it. And in digging around, you'll even find that the project maintainers will say, we expect at least 10% of the system resources for monitoring. And it's like, maybe that's acceptable.
Wait, but I bet there's pretty graphs.
Oh, the graphs are beautiful, by the way, but luckily that's Grafana. That's not even them, right? So, Grafana is doing a bang-up job. But, it's maybe that's acceptable for web requests. I'm not even sure I'm happy with it, with my monitoring stuff sucking up 10% if I'm even running just, simple request response stuff on a web service. But, okay, maybe you're within the realm of possibility, but, you guys know how it is. You've got to reply to an RTP. You have a guaranteed amount of time that you need CPU resources in order to process that RTP packet, right? I can't have something just sucking CPU off of the box like that. So yeah, there's a disconnect between, I think, some of the people who are putting together some of these projects in certain spaces and in other things. And by the way, with CAdvisor, there's ways to throttle things down and control things and everything else. I'm not saying that there aren't configuration things you can do to make this stuff better, but there's more back to the project mentality of what is acceptable and what are you trying to be versus, kind of where I would expect my head to be at on those types of spaces. Certainly they're not fans of the Unix philosophy. They're not trying to do one thing and do it well. But, hey, that's Google. So, what do you get?
So I was having a conversation with someone one time, and the way he stated this, it was just so funny. You'd have to see it in person. But he just explained it like this. He goes, wow. He goes, I just run top, and if I see it at the top of the list, just get it out of there. Right? Just get, if it's not essential, just get it out.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, honestly, that's a good approach, right? Like, what is this thing supposed to be? Well, oh man, it's funny, right? You run top now on a modern Linux system, and you see all the systemd things like, floating around and creeping up, and there are times where I get that some of these decisions get made, and you kind of just have to live with it. But there are days you just think like, oh man, do I really have to upgrade to the latest version? I know I do because of security and things, but you're going to be spending a ridiculous amount of time performance optimizing stuff with all of the various newfangled things that have crept in. And it's funny because I sound like one of those recalcitrant folks who are like, stop forward progress. But at the same time, back to I think somebody's point, one of my guys' point, I want my infrastructure to be boring, right? My customers don't pay me because I have cool infrastructure. Cool infrastructure is how I can provide better services so that hopefully I can get things out to my customer, but my customers are paying me for features. And so, when you look at this sort of as an overall game, people's time is a zero-sum game, and what you choose to spend your time on, you're not going to be spending your time elsewhere. We have people who are dedicated to the infrastructure, but if they're spending their time on performance optimizing their monitoring, they're not spending their time on making the services more scalable. They're not spending their time on actually being able to roll out changes faster within the services or improving our ability to guarantee levels of uptime and all these other things, right? So there's absolutely trade-offs to this stuff, and I think you kind of have to be careful about how fast you adopt this bleeding edge stuff. Anyway, yeah, that's a lot of things on infrastructure. Look at that.
So when we were down at the Omni, when we were talking, you said something which really caught my attention. I thought it was really interesting, and it was basically along the lines of basically monitoring the community and building metrics behind the of how changes in the software reflect within the community, and whether it's got a positive response or a negative response in the community.
Yep.
And I just found that so interesting.
Well, I think this gets back to open source projects in general, and I can't claim credit for this whole notion. This actually, and I can't remember the community that it was. It was actually, I can remember the name of the presentation. It was Assholes Are Ruining Your Community. And if you Google that, you'll find the presentation. It was somebody at Red Monk, if I remember correctly, who gave it, and it was just a fabulous presentation. But and I don't know if it was Gentoo. It was one of the Linux distributions, if I recall correctly. Maybe it was SUSE. I wish I could recall right now. We could Google it and find out in 5 seconds, but I'll just meander on anyways. But he made an interesting point, which is that there was a large, vibrant open source community. There was a thing, as happens in open source communities, and a bunch of people left, right? And so he actually took a data-driven approach to this of, well, what caused everybody to leave? Was it the thing, or was it, just what happens? And he actually did a pretty good job of correlating the data between, this is when this crisis occurred, this is when, there was a bunch of conflict in the community, and then you can just see contributions just start to just decline, right? And, correlation is not causation and all these other kinds of things, but at the same time, you usually can draw a fairly strong parallel between, frankly, people who are assholes and people who just leave, right? I mean, a lot of contributors aren't going to tell you they're leaving. They're just going to walk away because there's other things to do, right? Why am I going to go invest my time into a place that's hostile and treats me like crap or treats other people like crap? And so, that's gotten us to think many times about how do you measure contributions, right? How do you measure activity in your project? How do you measure engagement? And that whole even concept, I mean, measuring contributions, that's a fairly easy thing to measure, right? I can go look at Git commits. In Asterisk, we can go look at Garrett reviews. These things have APIs, and so I can go build scripts to go, extract commits and look at contributors. I can even figure out who the major contributors were, so you can, and I've actually put together graphs of the Asterisk project where you can see like almost different eras in the Asterisk project of like who were the top 10 contributors in different periods of time. And you can actually see like, this was the Mark Spencer era, maybe this was the Russell Bryant, Kevin Fleming era, and then maybe this was the Matt Jordan era, and then you've got Richard Mudgett through the whole thing, right? So you've got, you can kind of build out like these different cycles in the project just based on contributors. It gets far more challenging though when you're just trying to figure out what is community engagement. Like, what is and this even gets even to fuzzier notions of what is your community? Is your community your developers? Are they your users? Are they, where do you draw the line on these things? And so we've actually done some stuff in the Asterisk project. We don't, a lot of times we kind of do this offline a little bit with it, but it's mostly to try to see, are we being good stewards of the project? Are we driving people away, or are we keeping people engaged? And I'm not going to say we get it right all the time, but we do try to look at, everything from mailing list posts, community forum posts, who's making community forum posts, who's actually talking in different places, who's contributing back to the project, number of reviews, who's actually commenting on reviews, and just try to see, are these numbers going up or are they going down, right? And are we trying to engage people? Are we engaging people in all the correct places? And it's something that I know Matt Fredericks and the team care deeply about, because the last thing we want to do is be a place where people don't feel welcome or don't feel like they can participate.
Well, without any question, I think community is everything. I mean, the community, they're your ultimate reviewers in the end.
Yeah.
Without community, there's nothing else. I mean, you can have the world's greatest software, but unless people use it and give you feedback on it, it doesn't really exist. Well, it's like that old thing, like, is there a bear in the woods?
Yeah.
It's that old saying.
Yep. And do I like Asterisk as a piece of software? Sure. Does it have its good things? Yes. Does it have its bad things? Yes. Like, it's software, right? I mean, all software has good and bad things about it. And I would say that for any software project I've worked on at any point in time in my career. The thing that is irreplaceable about Asterisk is our community. It's the people who have chosen to use it and build businesses on top of it and adopt it and love it and everything else. And it's one of the reasons why, when we did some backwards incompatible things in Asterisk 12, when we did some of the major API work and major core infrastructure work. And that was not done lightly, because when you do things that are backwards incompatible, you're giving your user base an inflection point to decide whether or not they want to stick with you. And that's not something that we take lightly or trivialize in any fashion. I think in the early days of Asterisk, back in probably the 1.4, 1.2 time frame, we were a little too blasé about that kind of thing. Now we are, I would almost say, paranoid about, making sure that people who are on, once you got past that inflection point on Asterisk 12, Asterisk 13, really Asterisk 12, we're committed. We're going to carry you along with you. I know the team did huge things in Asterisk 15. We have, multiple stream support. We've got the video work that's been going on. And even in some of the core API level, they tried to make that stuff backwards compatible. So good example being Chan PJ SIP can take advantage of the multiple video streams and all the new stream core and all the stuff that's in the core of Asterisk. Chan SIP, we didn't update. And it's one for a lot of reasons, because it's Chan SIP, and I think you've heard me talk about what my feelings about Chan SIP. But at the same time, we didn't want to force everybody who is using Chan SIP and happy with it and doesn't care about video to have to go to PJ SIP, right? Like, for everything, right? If you want the multiple video stream thing, you're going to have to use PJ SIP. But Chan SIP continues to work, and it uses the old way of Asterisk in terms of passing frames around. And did that make the developer's life much more difficult? Hell yes, it did. They had to go support, both the old frame core as well as the new stream core, and there's all this stuff, the complexity that happened inside of Asterisk, and the development time was much more challenging, but one, that got it done, and two, we were able to carry along people with us. And I think that's hugely important, because it's the community that matters. It's the user base that matters in this whole thing. It's not whatever new whiz-bang thing the developers feel like adding.
Well, I think when it comes down to it is there are different types of users, and for the enterprise users, the companies that, their entire core business is modeled around open source. Those minute changes do affect the businesses without any question. But the success of a project is, coming from a corporate perspective is integral to the project. I mean, and integral to the business as well, because these businesses have invested time and money, and they advertising, everything that's associated with running a business is based on open source projects. And we're all very fortunate, because when you look at the various open source projects for telephony, they're all very stable projects. But there's a lot of projects out there, like we were talking about before, where for the monitoring systems for virtualization, like, it could just disappear, and then all of a sudden you have a business that has invested time, money, investment, training, and all this stuff, and it's just gone.
Yeah. No, I will say in our sort of cloud platform, the Kamalio and Asterisk piece is probably the most boring, reliable part of the whole infrastructure. I mean, that's the way it should be, right? We see more churn on things around either the supporting parts of the infrastructure, less on Node.js. Now, we do a lot of Node.js development here in house. A lot of our stuff is written in JavaScript. Used to be that we saw more churn in Node land, but it's really firmed up a bit in the last couple major versions, which has been great to see. And we actually had one of our developers commented, one of the ways of, and this is not a universal truth, this is just a sort of way of viewing it. If a project has an LTS strategy, that's a sign that they've committed to the long haul on something, right? That, okay, we're going to go do this thing for 3 or 4 years, and we're going to keep it going for 3 or 4 years. And that's a good sign, right? In terms of, and it's not to say that you shouldn't use stuff that doesn't have an LTS strategy or it doesn't have like a multi-year commitment. It just means you need to know what you're getting into, that this thing may go away. It may have radical changes, and you're going to be spending more of your time when you adopt that technology.
So how's the video going?
It's going. Clearly with Asterisk video, we've had video of I would call it limited. That's probably a charitable way of saying it. Limited video support in Asterisk for, better part of a decade. Certainly with ConfBridge back in Asterisk 10, you had some video conferencing capabilities, but it was very limited as a charitable way of describing it. I'd follow the leader, kind of talk detection types of things. It could do multi-party video, but not actually show the multiple parties. So it's not really multi-party video. It's just switching between video streams. And it's really not going to cut it. Particularly, once WebRTC showed up on the scene, and you started to see people's user experiences starting to expect a better user experience around video, it just really wasn't going to be sufficient. Clearly, FreeSwitch has been doing video well for a very long period of time. You guys have an awesome video experience, as we can tell right now. And there's lots of other great projects out there that do video stuff. You've got Jitsi Video Bridge, of course, which is probably the premier selective forwarding open source SFU implementation. Janus, MeetEcho, if I remember correctly. You've got Inyaki's Media Soup. So there's a number of different video kinds of technologies out there that are doing different approaches. I think most of the projects I'm familiar with have gone with a SFU approach. FreeSwitch, of course, going with the MCU approach. And that's not even to get into the difference between the two. It's just, there's pros and cons to both. So we in the Asterisk project were looking at it, and it was kind of, I think people had heard me talk multiple times about whether or not we would even do it. And I think in previous conferences I had alluded to the fact that maybe we wouldn't. That, maybe Asterisk is really good at audio, and that's good enough. And if you really need a good video experience, you can go deploy another open source project. And that actually, and I'll be honest, that's actually not a bad thing, right? For example, if I needed a good MCU experience because that's what my business needed, I would go deploy FreeSwitch. And if I had Asterisk today and I really wanted FreeSwitch for the MCU, then I would go deploy them together. And you can make Asterisk and FreeSwitch work great together, right? SIP is SIP. And that's one of the beauty of open protocols and these open source projects. We started actually, though, honestly, just within our community, back to the whole thing about community being so important.
With an SFU.
Yeah, we went with an SFU, and it was because, our community kept asking for it. And we had enough people in our community who said, look, yeah, I could go deploy multiple open source projects. I just don't want to, and my business case may be limited enough that that's overkill, right? So it was really just the demands of the users in the community that sort of just led us to rethink, do we really want to go tackle this problem? And one of the big reticent parts we had about it was that it's not just video, right? Like, as Anthony or Brian or Michael or Ken or anybody else can tell you on the FreeSwitch team, like, yeah, okay, there's video streams, but now you just said streams, right? And how are you going to interface with the video? Well, I want to use WebRTC. Well, that's lovely, but now you've got the browser compatibility things to worry about. You've got all the WebRTC RFCs to worry about. And Asterisk, had an RTP implementation that didn't really do a lot of the WebRTC RFCs around RTP. So in our case for Asterisk, you've got video as sort of the end goal to get to an SFU, but to get there, you've got to tackle multiple streams inside the core of Asterisk and understanding the fact that there's multiple media streams. You've got to tackle multiple WebRTC RFCs in the RTP implementation, which also required some fairly heavy lifting in our RTP engine. You have to deal with the SDP parsing that actually, takes the SDP payload and understands what the heck I'm supposed to do with this thing. And all of that plumbing work buys you nothing Like, no user really cares about that until you finally can deliver more than one video stream. And so
just expect it to work.
it's just expected to work. Like, what's your problem, guys? So, like, and in Asterisk Land, I mean, have we wanted to do multiple streams for years? Yeah, David Vossel, way back on Asterisk 10, like, had written like an entire wiki page on how to do multiple streams in Asterisk. We're like, yeah, we should totally do that someday. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff since I've been at Digium, but, there's no business case, there's no open source case for just doing stuff in the core that nothing can use. So really, this whole notion of getting to a multi-party video experiences, we knew was going to be the tipping point for all sorts of additional core infrastructure work. And, there's no way you're going to do this in anything less than a year. So we also knew that if we did this, we weren't doing anything else. Like, this was it. And, that means you've got to have the open source community behind you. And I don't just mean your user base who may be asking for it. We can't do this. I mean, Digium can't do this alone. We need the open source developers, even if they're not contributing to the video project, to come help us out on all the other crap that comes up, right? I mean, if Josh and Richard and George are focused on working in the core on media streams, somebody's got to go fix that crash, or has to go, help us out with this PJ SIP thing happening over here, or this Chan SIP thing happening over here, or, Ken's favorite, this AppQ nightmare over here. You've got to have that developer community behind those big efforts. So it's not a small decision to go make. And like I said, once you're committed to it, you're not going to see any fruits of this labor for a really long time, because you're spending all this time getting the core up to a point where it can even support the multiple video streams. So to the whole community's, benefit and to their credit, we got that. We had a lot of help from everybody from like Alexander Trod and Walter Dokes, and you've got Sean Bright and Corey Farrell and all these guys in the Asterisk developer community who don't work for Digium, who are just helping out and just keeping things moving along while, we could go spend some cycles on some of this core work. And that's, there's no way we could do that without having that open source developer community. When I look at where we got to, I think we've got a really good, what I would call first step on video. It is by no means done. It's by no means everything you want in an SFU. If you go compare what we're doing today versus Jitsi Video Bridge has got way more capabilities in an SFU than we've got right now. And so if all you need is a video SFU, you may want to look at Jitsi Video Bridge. But if you're already an Asterisk user, the good news is you've got something there, and it's a really good initial starting point for having some video conferencing. I think the question you asked Michael was great about video recording, because man, that's a whole bunch of work, and that's not actually something we've tackled yet. Recording video is not the same thing as recording an audio stream, and as Michael was alluding to, you can record one side, you can record both sides, you can record multiple streams. You've got to think through, am I recording each stream individually, which is not what most people want, but every now and again you want somebody who wants all the streams broken up. When you're not actually recording each individual stream, then you get into containerization formats like MP4, and when you have a containerization format, a lot of times those are based on proprietary technologies, and so now you've got distribution problems based around that. We've got work to do there ourselves in terms of recording video, and yeah, it's not a trivial problem. There's all these things that happen once you start tackling this that flow out from, I know I've got multiple picture boxes. You guys have been living that for a long time, and I guess I can say we're excited we get to now as well. But it's clearly to be a little bit different just in terms of the implementation differences between different technologies. But we're pretty excited about it. I think it'll be good for our community in the long run.
Well, that question was actually a question that came off the mailing list, I believe, in the last week, and so. Really, what had happened was it was an end user implementer that was playing with the technology for a while, and was having problems. But there's more than one option for recording, and so it started out as they were playing around with mod VLC, And it's really I think from a perspective, we've kind of deprecated it. And so, it took a dialogue to even get to the point where they were using even the wrong module to turn around and start, addressing the issue properly. And there's really, unless you have that direct access, to the core developers, no one would ever really know that. I mean, and that's what the magic, that's one of the magics of open source, though. And it's access to the developers. It's access, it's access to the different resources that are online. But I mean, you're never going to go to a major corporation that's selling commercial software and ever get the answer directly from the person writing the code.
Well, you might, but it might involve like $60,000 in an SLA. So,
yeah.
It's a little bit cheaper to hit up the mailing list, yeah. No, I think your point is, and I really like Michael's response too on that it's like, well, what do you mean by recording? I mean, just the whole nuance of what is the user trying to achieve here? Like, what are you trying to get done, right? Because we take these concepts and we have this language of, I want to record the call. Okay, well, what do you mean by call, right? I mean, all these things you have to get into very specifics to understand. Like, there's all these different ways to go accomplish this particular thing, and everybody's use case is going to be a little bit different. I think, like I said, on the Astra side, we're going to have a lot of work to do over the next release cycle or whatever it ends up being to go sort of fill in a lot of those sort of user experience types of things. But again, I think, really the purpose of Asterisk 15 was to sort of get that first thing out there where there's something usable and it's useful. But I'm sure there's going to be plenty of use cases that people are still looking at going, how do I get this thing done? And we're going to have to go, it's a good question. Let's go help you out with that. So it should be a pretty interesting year of development as a result still coming up.
So do we have any questions from the community?
You've got an asterisk-related guy here. Get some tomatoes.
Large, rotten tomatoes. I'm just going to chime in here, Matt, and sorry, Michael. It's been great having you on today. And I think you've covered so much. I don't know that we've got time to take a lot of questions today. and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, well, Matt, thank you so much for coming in. It's really good having you on the show, and we very much appreciate it.
No, it was a pleasure to be here, and I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to the next ClueCon, finding out what you guys are doing in FreeSwitch. I think you guys are doing some really awesome things, certainly around all the video conferencing things. Your Verdo stuff is awesome. It's really cool to see how the different projects have evolved. And I think we have evolved slightly differently, but I think that's really been a testament to the success of both projects. So definitely looking forward to see what you guys are up to in the next year here as well.
Well, thank you for coming in. Ken?
All right, guys. We're going to wrap this up. Don't forget, we'll be back here next week. And I should have had the calendar pulled up for this. But we've got some fun stuff coming up in the very near future. Next week, Dan Bogos he'll be talking about CG rates. So you guys want to come in and check that out. Matt knows who that is. Everybody knows in the community should know who Dan is. He's a super cool guy. So you guys come on in and check that out. Don't forget, click that subscribe button below the video so you can get the updates on when we're doing that. When we're doing more videos, and when Kathleen and the rest of the team post more videos, you'll get that information. Don't forget, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you guys next week.
You've been watching ClueCon Weekly. Tune in every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, or visit us online. Please follow the FreeSwitch team on Twitter and Facebook by visiting our site at freeswitch.org.